People always ask me what it feels like behind the face. They mean the stillness, the eyes forward, the chin level, the long minutes that turn into an hour and the hour that turns into a watch, and the man underneath all that wool and fur who does not so much as shift his weight. They want to know if it itches, if my mind wanders, if I count cars or sheep or the seconds. They want, I think, to be told that there is nothing in there at all, that the discipline is a kind of sleep, and that the man in the red tunic is mostly empty, a uniform propped on a frame. I let them think it mostly. It is easier and it is part of the work. But it is not true, and on the one night I am going to tell you about, it was the furthest thing from true that it has ever been. Because there is a great deal happening behind the face. There is everything happening behind the face. The stillness is not the absence of a man. It is a man holding himself the way you hold a full cup across a crowded room, every muscle aware, every step measured, the whole of you bent to the single task of not spilling. The post looks like nothing. It is the hardest thing I have ever learned to do, and it took me longer than anything I did in the years before, in the places I do not name to tourists. My name is Alec Thorne. For 22 years I served in the Royal Foot Guards of Corvin, and for the last 11 of those I stood the King's Yard at Maundry Palace, on the detachment that holds the Sallow Arch in the inner court on state nights. I am an old man now, and I tell this story the way old men tell stories, which is to say I tell it slowly and I do not apologize for the slowness. But I tell it true. I was there for every minute of it. I was, in fact, the only one who was, the only one close enough to hear the words that were said to me, because they were said low, the way a man says a thing he does not want a record of. The man who said them was named Sterling Voss. I want to be fair to him, even now, because being fair to a man you have no reason to love is its own kind of discipline, and I have spent my life learning discipline. So I will tell you that Sterling Voss was not, on the surface, a brute. He did not arrive that summer evening shouting. He did not come in swinging. He came in the way the truly dangerous money comes in, smiling, unhurried, dressed beautifully, with a watch on his wrist worth more than the house I grew up in, and a way of looking at a room as though he had already bought it and was only deciding what to keep. It was the night of the midsummer investiture, when the crown of Corvin honors those it wishes the country to admire. Soldiers, sometimes. More often in these later years, the men with the money, the founders, the benefactors, the ones whose names go up on the new hospital wing and the new bridge and the scholarship fund. Voss was one of those. He had given, the program said, a very great deal to the children's hospital out at Larkmore, and to the lifeboat service, and to half a dozen causes a man would have to be made of stone to speak against. He was to be made a companion of the Order of the Wren that night, a ribbon and a small star, pinned by the king's own hand in the long gallery, and afterward there would be the reception in the King's Yard under the summer sky, with the lights strung between the old limes and the band playing low and the whole of polite Corvin turning out to be seen turning out. I had read his name on the duty sheet that afternoon without any particular feeling. A benefactor, a gala, a long evening on the arch. I had stood 100 of them. What I did not know, what almost no one in the yard knew that night, and what I would not learn the shape of until much later, was that Sterling Voss's fortune was a lie wearing a very good suit. That the children's hospital and the lifeboats were the polish, and that underneath them ran a machine for taking filthy money and washing it clean, money that had come up out of places no one wanted to look, through shell companies and false charities and a freight line that moved more than freight. The honor he was to receive that night was, for him, the last coat of paint. Once the king had pinned that star to his chest, no one in the country would look too hard at where the rest of it came from. A man the king has honored is a man above suspicion. That was the whole point of the evening for him. He had bought everything else. He had come to buy the last thing money could not quite reach on its own, the look of being clean. But I am getting ahead of myself, and an old soldier should keep his column in order. I took the arch at 6. The sallow arch is the inner gate of the king's yard, an old stone span with a worn boot mark in the threshold where 3 centuries of guardsmen have turned, and on a night like that it is the seam between the public part of the evening and the private part, the gallery, the strong room corridor, the king's own stair. The cars came up the long drive in the gold light and let out their cargo of silk and starch, and the yard filled, and the band found its feet, and I stood my post the way I had stood it 1,000 nights, eyes level over the heads of the crowd, the bearskin a warm weight, the rifle at my side, the white gloves bright in the lowering sun. It is a strange thing to be looked at by 1,000 people and to be invisible to nearly all of them. They photograph you. They stand beside you and grin and make the same joke about not being able to make you laugh, and you have heard it 10,000 times and it lands on you like rain on a roof, and you give them nothing, which is what they came for, and they go away pleased. Child waved at me that night early on, a small boy in a too large jacket, holding his grandfather's hand, and I will admit to you, because I am old and it costs me nothing now, that a guardsman learns 1,000 ways to answer a child without moving a muscle, and I used one of them, and the boy's whole face opened up, and he tugged his grandfather's sleeve and said something I could not hear, and they moved on into the lights. That is the kind of thing that happens behind the face. The crowd never sees it. It is not for them. Voss arrived at 7:30. I knew it was him before anyone told me, because the crowd bent toward him the way grass bends toward a wind. He came up the steps with 2 others in tow, a thin man with a tablet held to his chest like a hymnal, and a broad one in a suit that did not quite hide what he was for, and Voss in the middle of them, easy, smiling, his hand out to the people who mattered and his eyes already past them, already moving, already counting the room. He shook the Lord Chamberlain's hand. He bent to kiss the hand of an old duchess who had not been kissed in earnest in 40 years and who colored like a girl. He was good at it. I will not pretend he was not good at it. A man does not build what he had built without being able to make a room love him for the length of an evening. Then he saw me. I want to be exact about this because the exactness matters. A man like Voss does not see a guardsman the way a child sees one, or the way a tired tourist sees one. He sees a thing that has been placed. He looks at the arch and the boot-worn stone and the red wool and the bearskin and the still face, and some part of him does the only sum he knows how to do, which is the sum of what a thing costs and what it is worth, and whether it can be moved. I have been looked at by a great many men in my life. I was looked at once across a valley by men who meant to kill me, and I will tell you that there is a kinship between that look and the one sterling Voss gave me across the king's yard. Both of them are the look of a man working out how to get past you. He came over. Of course he came over. He had a glass of champagne in his hand and the thin man at his elbow and the broad one drifting a careful 3 steps behind, and he stopped in front of me with the particular ease of a man who has never once in his life been told to wait, and he looked up at me. I am a tall man, and the bearskin makes me taller, and he smiled the smile that had made him rich. "They really don't move, do they?" he said. "Not to me, to the thin man." The thin man made the small laugh that paid men make. Voss reached up and flicked the chin strap of my bearskin with one finger, a little flick almost fond, the way you might tap the nose of a statue to prove to your friends it is stone. "Incredible," he said. "You could set fire to his boots and he'd just stand there. That's not a man. That's a flag with legs." People nearby laughed, because people will laugh at a powerful man's joke the way they will warm their hands at any fire. The thin man laughed. A woman in green laughed. Somewhere a phone came up, the little black eye of it, and I felt the evening tip over into the thing it was going to be. I gave him nothing. That is the work. I kept my eyes level over his head at the far wall and the limes and the strung lights, and I let his words pass over me like every other word that had passed over me that night, and I waited for him to be bored and go. He was not bored. That is the thing about a certain kind of man. The stillness, which sends most people off well pleased, does not please him at all. It does the opposite. It is a closed door, and he has spent his whole life learning that there is no door that does not open if you push it right, and so my stillness was not an answer to him. It was a challenge. I could see it work on him, the smile going from easy to fixed, the eyes narrowing just slightly, and I knew I had met enough of them that he was not going to walk away until he had got something out of me. A flinch, a glance, a crack, something he could hold up to the room and to himself and say, "There, you see, even this one, even him." He stepped in closer. The broad man behind him shifted his weight, a small readiness, and the thin man with the tablet drew back, and that drawing back told me something, because a man only steps out of the frame when he does not want to be in the picture. "Here's what I think," Voss said, low now just to me, the smile still on his mouth but gone out of his voice. "I think you're not as empty as they say. I think there's somebody in there, and I think everybody in there has a number." And then he did the thing that turned the whole night. He had folded it small, I realized afterward. He must have done it in his hand while he was crossing the yard, or had it ready in his pocket, because it came out fast and it came out practiced. A roll of notes, banded tight, thick as my two thumbs together. High notes, I saw the color of them. And he took my right hand, the white glove, hanging at my side by the rifle, and he turned it palm up with the easy presumption of a man arranging a thing he owns, and he pressed the roll into it, and folded my fingers up around it with his own warm hand, and held them closed there for a moment, his face close to mine, low and pleasant and certain. "That's just to say hello," he said. "There's the same again and more if you do me one small thing. In a little while my people are going to bring a case through that arch behind you, the gray one, heavy. They'll go through to the gallery side, through your nice quiet corridor there, and you are going to keep looking at that lovely far wall and you are not going to see them. 60 seconds, that's all. You won't have moved a muscle. It's the easiest money you'll ever make, and nobody," and here he patted the back of my closed fist, my fist with his money in it, very gently, like a man settling a deal, "nobody will ever know but you and me." I want to tell you what was happening behind the face in that moment, because this is the whole of it. This is the thing I have spent the rest of my life turning over. The first thing was the money itself. I could feel it through the glove, the dense pad of it, more cash than I had ever held at one time in my life. I was not a rich man. I have never been a rich man. I had a wife at home named Iris and a daughter at the teaching college whose fees came due every term and sat in my chest like a stone. And I will not insult you or myself by pretending that the weight of all that money in my hand did not, for the length of one breath, mean something. It would be a lie, and I have not come this far to lie to you at the end. For the length of one breath, I felt the size of it. And then the second thing came, which was the rest of me, the part that 22 years had built, and the breath went out, and the size of it was gone. Because here is what a man like Voss never understands, and it is the thing that undid him in the end. He thought the stillness was emptiness. He thought that behind the face there was nothing, or that if there was something it was small and tired and for sale. He had built his whole life on the certainty that every closed door opens, that every man has a number, and he had grown so rich and so sure on that certainty that he had stopped being able to imagine the other thing. The thing I am, the thing my regiment is, the thing the boot-worn stone of the sallow arch had been holding 300 years before he was born. He thought I was a flag with legs. He did not understand that the flag means something, or he had decided long ago that nothing means anything, which for a man like him comes to the same. I did not close my hand around his money. That is the thing I want you to hear, because it is the smallest thing and it is everything. He had folded my fingers up himself, his warm hand over my glove, but a guardsman's hand is trained to a stillness deeper than a flinch, and when he let go I did not grip. I let my fingers stay exactly where he had put them, neither closing nor opening, the roll sitting loose in my open palm under the curl of my own knuckles, mine in no way at all. I did not look down at it. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes level on the far wall and the limes and the lights, and I gave him once more nothing. But behind the face I had begun, very carefully to think. Because the money was not the worst of it. A bribe is an old thing, and a guardsman who has stood the gates of a palace has been offered money before, to let a cousin through, to pose for a photograph he should not pose for, to look away from a small foolishness. This was different, and I knew it was different the moment he said the word case. A gray case, heavy, brought through a restricted arch into the quiet corridor that ran past the strong room and the gallery on a night when half the crown's honors and a good deal more sat behind those doors. 60 seconds and look away. That is not a man bending a guardsman to get his cousin past the rope. That is a man using the cover of the most respectable evening in the kingdom to move something he did not want seen, into or out of a place no honest case had business being. I did not know what was in the case. I want to be clear about that. I did not, standing there with his money loose in my open glove, know the first thing about shell companies or laundered freight or any of the machinery that came out later in the long rooms with the long tables. I am a guardsman. I knew only what I could see, which was a rich man trying to buy a hole in the wall of a place I was sworn to hold, on the one night the country was about to call him clean. And I knew the one thing my whole life had taught me, which is that the wall does not have a number. The wall is not for sale. That is what a wall is for. He waited. I could feel him waiting, the smile fixed, the broad man behind him still, the thin man with the tablet a careful distance off. He had done this before. I could feel that too. He had folded money into a hand before and held the man's eyes and felt the deal settle, and he was waiting for the settle, the small relaxation, the flick of the eyes that means yes. It did not come. The seconds went by. The band played. A laugh went up across the yard. And Sterling Voss, who had never in his life been left holding a yes that did not arrive, felt for the first time that evening the cold edge of the thing he had not understood. His smile changed just slightly. It went thin at the corners. "Don't be a fool," he said very low. "It's the most money you'll see in a year and you don't even have to move. You think anyone's going to thank you for the other thing. You think the king knows your name. You think that stone you're standing on cares whether you eat." He leaned a fraction closer and his voice went down to almost nothing, and the pleasant thing was all the way out of it now. "I have bought better men than you for less, soldier. Generals, judges. I bought the man who pins my star on tonight near enough. You're a doorman in a fur hat. Take the money." And there it was. The whole of him in 3 sentences said low under the band and the lights. "I have bought better men than you." He believed it. That was the terrible thing about him, and I understood it standing there. He was not lying. He believed every word. He had lived so long in a world where everything had a price that he had genuinely forgotten there was another kind of world, the older kind, the kind the worn stone under my boots belonged to. He thought he was telling me the truth about how the world works. He thought he was doing me a kindness, lifting the scales from a doorman's eyes. I gave him nothing. I will not pretend it was easy. It was not easy. A man can stand a great deal of being called empty by strangers, but there is a particular thing that happens in the chest when a man like that, holding his filth in your hand, tells you he has bought generals and judges and the king's own pin, and means it, and is right enough about enough of it that you cannot even be sure he is wrong. There was a heat that came up in me, behind the face, that had nothing to do with the bearskin. I had carried men out of places worse than he could imagine. I had stood over a friend in the last cold hour of his life, and held his hand and lied to him gently about how it would be. And I had come home and learned to hold a cup of stillness across a crowded room for the rest of my days. And this man in his beautiful suit was telling me I was a doorman with a number, and was pressing his dirty money into my glove to prove it. The heat came up, and then I did the thing 22 years had built me to do, which was the only thing, the thing that is the whole secret of the post and of the regiment, and I have come to believe of a decent life. I let the heat come up and I did not spend it. I held it. I held it the way I held the cup, the way I held the still face, the way I held everything. I let it sit in my chest and burn, and I did not move and I did not speak and I did not close my hand. And I waited, because the changeover was coming. That was the whole of my plan in that moment. It was not a grand plan. I am not a clever man, and I have never claimed to be. My plan was that the changeover was coming, the relief detail at the half hour, the formal handover at the arch, my colonel on the night being a man named Maddox who had served longer than I had and was as straight as the rifle in my hand, and that I would hold and not pocket his money, and not look away from his arch. And at the changeover I would put the roll of dirty notes and every word the man had said to me into the hands of Colonel Maddox, and let the wall do what the wall does. That was all. I would not strike him. I would not so much as turn my head. I would simply refuse, in the deepest way a man can refuse, which is to stay exactly what you are, and let the other man's wrong fall back on him under its own weight. But the changeover was 20 minutes off, and Sterling Voss was not a patient man. When the yes did not come, when he had said his 3 sentences and patted my fist and waited and got again, something in him turned over. I have seen it in men. The push that does not move the wall becomes, very fast, a kind of fury, because the wall has told the man a thing about himself that he cannot bear to be told, which is that there is a place his money does not reach. And rather than sit with that, the man redoubles. He pushes harder. He makes a show, because if he can make the wall a joke, he does not have to feel what the wall has shown him. Voss stepped back. He turned, half to the thin man and half to the little gathering of beautiful people who had drifted in to watch the great man amuse himself with the statue, and he spread his hands, and the pleasant public face came back on like a lamp. "Watch this," he said to the room. "This is my favorite thing, watch." He took the champagne flute from his own hand, and with the casual cruelty of a man who has never once been made to clean up after himself, he tipped it slowly out over my right boot. The cold of it went through the leather. He watched my face the whole time, hunting for the flinch, and the people watched, and the phones came up, 3 of them now 4, the little black eyes, and the band played on. I gave him nothing. He laughed, and the room laughed with him, that nervous warming of hands laugh, and he set the empty glass on the stone ledge of the arch, on the worn stone, the boot-marked stone, and he reached up and took the chin-strap of my bearskin between 2 fingers again, and gave it a small tug, harder this time, enough to rock the weight of it on my head, enough that holding my neck level took a thing it does not usually take. "Tin soldier," he said, soft, just for me again under the laughter. "Tin soldier, you'll take the money, everybody takes the money." And here, I will tell you, is where the hidden thing in me nearly came out, and where the discipline of half a life was worth more than every note in that roll. Because he was wrong about me in a way he could not have known, and the wrongness of it was a fire. Sterling Voss thought he was tormenting a doorman. He thought the man behind the face was small, and tired, and for sale, a flag with legs who had never done anything braver than stand in the sun. He did not know, he could not have known. It was not in the program. It was not on the duty sheet. It was in a file in a building he would never see. That the man whose boot he had poured his wine on had, in another life, in places the crown does not put on the honors list, done the kind of soldiering that men do not talk about afterward. He did not know about the valley, or the long night carry, or the medal that lives in a drawer at home under the spare buttons, because I have never once wanted to wear it. He looked at the bearskin and the red wool, and he saw the costume, and he had no idea, none at all, that he had chosen to humiliate, in front of 1,000 phones, one of the more dangerous men in the King's Yard, and that the danger was not in my hands, which could have folded him in half, but in the very thing he was mocking. In the stillness, in the discipline he had mistaken for stupidity, in the refusal he could not buy. That is the heart of it, and I have thought about it for the rest of my life. His mistake was not that he picked a man who was weak. His mistake was that he could not tell the difference between a man who would not react and a man who could not. He thought my discipline was my emptiness. It was the opposite. It was the fullest thing about me. It was the place where everything I am is kept. And he had just put his dirty money into the one pair of hands in the kingdom that were built, trained, and sworn never to close around it. So I held. I let the heat come up and I did not spend it. I kept my eyes level over his head at the limes and the lights. My neck found the weight of the bearskin again and carried it level. The champagne was cold in my boot and I let it be cold. And behind the face I made myself a clock, the way you learn to in the bad places, counting not seconds but the things that matter, the position of the relief detail, the time to the half hour, the line of sight to the gallery door where Colonel Maddox would come, the loose roll of notes sitting in my open glove that I had not closed my hand on and would not, the gray case that had not yet appeared. And then it appeared. I saw them before he did, because seeing things is the post and he had his back half to the arch, playing to the crowd. Two men in the staff black of the catering firm, carrying between them a gray case flat heavy, the kind a man carries from the knees coming up the side of the yard toward the arch in my quiet corridor with the particular too careful walk of men carrying a thing that must not be dropped and must not be looked at. They were watching Voss, waiting for his sign, the 60 seconds. The look away he believed he had just bought. I want you to understand what I did then, because it is the smallest action in this whole story, and it was the one that ended him, and it was nothing. It was less than nothing. I have spent a life learning that the largest things turn on the smallest, and that the discipline of a guardsman is not in the grand gesture but in the refusal of it. I did not raise an alarm. I did not shout or step from my post or reach for the men with the case or lay a hand on Sterling Voss. I did exactly what I was sworn to do, which was to remain. I stayed the wall. The relief detail was, by then, 4 minutes out. I had my clock, and the men with the case were 30 seconds out, and the whole of Voss's plan depended on the one thing he was certain of, the thing he had paid for, the thing he could not imagine not getting, which was that the doorman would take the money and look away. I did not look away. I let them come. I let the two men in catering black carry the gray case right up to the threshold of the sallow arch, to the worn stone, to the boot mark, into my line of sight, fully and plainly seen. And I did not move and I did not look away and I did not give the sign, because there was no sign, because the wall is not for sale. And when they reached the threshold and looked to Voss for his nod, and Voss looked at me, at my level eyes, at my still face, at the open glove where his money sat untaken and unclosed. He understood, in one cold drop, that he had not bought anything at all, that he was a man standing in the most public place in the kingdom with a gray case he could not explain, in front of a guardsman who had seen everything, and 1,000 phones, and the relief detail now turning into the top of the yard in column, with the colonel of the night at its head. I have been in a few moments in my life where everything turned. The valley was one. There have been others, and I will tell you that the look on Sterling Voss's face in that one drop of time, the moment the certainty went out of it, the moment the whole machine of his life, every general and judge and bought man, every coat of paint, every clean lie, met the one wall it could not get past, and he understood that the wall had been watching the case the entire time. That look was worth more to me than the medal in the drawer at home. Not because I wanted him ruined. I want to be careful here. I am old, and I have buried enough men and carried enough of them that I take no joy in any man's fall. But there is a thing a soldier feels when a wrong meets its wall and stops, when the thing that should not pass does not pass, and it is not joy. It is something steadier than joy. It is the feeling of the world being, for one moment, in order. The changeover came up the yard in column. Colonel Maddox was a square, gray man with a face like the weather, and he had been a guardsman longer than I had and a man longer than that, and he came to the arch for the formal relief the way he had come 1,000 times. The relief took post. And in the half-minute of the handover, the half-minute when one guardsman becomes still and the other becomes the wall, the oldest small ceremony in the regiment, I did the only unusual thing I did that whole long night. I turned, as the drill turns a man, and I came to the colonel, and I put the roll of notes into his hand and not my pocket, and I said low, in the few words the moment allowed, exactly what had happened. A bribe pressed on me untaken. A case, gray, heavy, brought to restricted arch under the cover of the evening, to be passed into the gallery corridor for the price of a guardsman's 60 seconds. The man's own words about generals and judges, and the pin he was to receive that night. I said it flat and short and complete, the way you report a thing, and I put the dirty money in the straight man's straight hand, and I let the wall do what the wall does. Colonel Maddox did not change his weather face. He looked once at the roll of notes in his hand, and once across the yard at Sterling Voss standing very still now beside a gray case with two frightened men in catering black, and once at me, and what passed across his eyes was not surprise. It was recognition. It was the look one wall gives another. He closed his hand around the money not to keep it, but to hold it as evidence, which is a different kind of closing entirely, the only kind a guardsman's hand is built for, and he said 3 words to me, quiet, that I have kept all these years. "Well held, Sergeant." That was all. Then he turned, and the evening, which Sterling Voss had thought he owned, began very quietly to come apart in his hands. I will not pretend I saw all of what followed, because by then I was relieved of the post, and a guardsman who is off the arch goes where he is sent and keeps his counsel. But Maundry Palace is a small world in the back corridors, and an old soldier hears things. And over the weeks and months that followed I came to know the shape of it, and I will give it to you plainly, because you have come this far. The gray case was opened that night, in a quiet room off the gallery, by men whose work is quiet rooms. I am told it did not contain what a guardsman fears, no weapon, nothing meant to harm a soul in the yard. What it contained was money. A great deal of money, and the paper that money leaves behind, ledgers and instruments and the small ugly machinery by which dirty money is carried from the place it was made to the place it would be made clean. It was, I am told, never meant to stay in the palace at all. It was meant to pass through my arch, through the quiet corridor, out the gallery side to a car on the private drive, using the 1 hour in the year when the whole apparatus of the crown was busy honoring the man who carried it, when no one would dream of stopping a case at the midsummer investiture, when the most respectable evening in the kingdom was itself the cover. He had not been bringing the filth in. He had been moving it out, through the cleanest door he could find on the cleanest night under his own new star. It was, the quiet men said, rather brilliant. It had only the one flaw, which was that it depended on a guardsman having a number. The honor was not conferred. The king, I am told, was informed in the long gallery before the pinning, and the King of Corvin in those years was a hard old man who had soldiered in his own youth and had small patience for paint over rot. He did not make a scene. Men like Voss expect a scene and feed on it. The king gave him none. He simply did not come to pin the star, and the star was not pinned, and the quiet men came instead, and the thing was done the way the truly final things are done, without raised voices, in the corridors behind the lights. It was a little under 3 hours from the moment Sterling Voss folded his money into my glove to the moment they walked him out of Maundry Palace. I know the timing because I was at the gatehouse window by then, off duty, with a cup of tea going cold in my hand, the way an old soldier ends up at a window when the night is not done with him. The drive was dark. The band had stopped. The beautiful people had been gently turned out into their cars with murmured apologies about an electrical fault, knowing nothing, and the yard was empty under the strung lights. And down the drive came Sterling Voss, between the quiet men, his beautiful suit just as beautiful and his face entirely changed. And his hands. I saw it from the window, and I will not pretend I did not look. His hands were behind him in the irons, the same hands that had taken mine and folded my fingers up around his money, and held them closed and patted my fist, and told me everybody takes the money. He did not see me at the window. There was no reason he should. But I watched him go down the dark drive and out the gate, and I thought about the thing he had said to me. I have bought better men than you, and I found that the heat I had held in my chest all evening had gone out of me entirely, and what was left was the steady thing, the world in order thing, the only reward a man in my trade ever really gets and the only one worth having. The cash he pressed into my glove was logged that night as evidence, every note of it, and it became, this is the part I find I cannot stop turning over, even now, it became the first thread they pulled. The bribe was the crack. A man does not carry that kind of money to push into a guardsman's hand unless he has a great deal more of it that he should not have. And the moment Colonel Maddox laid that roll on a table and said how it had come to be in his possession, the quiet men had a place to put the end of their thread, and they pulled, and the whole washing machine of sterling Voss came apart over the following year, company by false company, charity by false charity. The children's hospital and the lifeboat standing untouched and real in the middle of it, all like the one honest room in a house of mirrors, because that is how the cleverest of them work. They do real good with one hand to cover the other, and it nearly always holds, right up until it doesn't. It came down to the same cash in the end. The roll he had pressed into a doorman's glove to prove that everybody has a number was the same money that walked him, thread by thread, out of every clean life he had bought and into the kind of room a man like that fears more than any other, the kind where his money cannot follow. He had said nobody will ever know but you and me. He had been right about almost everything in his life and wrong about that, and the wrongness of that one small certainty had been enough, because it always is. The wall does not need to be tall. It only needs to be a wall. I went back to the Arch the next state night and the next, and a great many after that. No one strung my name up. No one pinned anything to my chest. The medal in the drawer at home stayed in the drawer, under the spare buttons, where I have always wanted it, and I stood my post in the red wool and the bearskin and the white gloves and gave the tourists their 1,000 jokes and gave the children the small answers that open up their faces. And to nearly everyone who passed I was, as I have always been, a flag with legs, a thing that does not move, a man who is mostly empty, propped on a frame. Let them think it. It is easier. And it is, in its way, the whole of the work to carry everything you are, full to the brim, across the long, crowded evening of a life, and to spend none of it on the men who poke you, and to keep it whole and ready for the 1 minute it is needed. Sterling Voss looked at me and saw nothing, and was so sure of the nothing that he put his ruin into my hand with his own warm fingers and folded them closed. He never understood that the stillness was not the absence of a man. He never understood, to the very end, that the hardest thing I have ever learned, the thing that took longer than the valley and the long carry and all of it, was not to react when a man pours wine on your boot and calls you a tin soldier in front of 1,000 phones, and that the man who has learned that, truly learned it, all the way down, is not for sale at any number, because he has already paid the only price that ever mattered, and bought the only thing worth owning, which is himself. People ask me what it feels like behind the face. I tell them the truth now when I tell it at all. It feels like holding a full cup across a crowded room. It feels like the whole of you, awake and still and yours. And on the one night a man tried to buy a hole in the wall I was sworn to be, I found out what the cup is for. It is for the boy who waves at you and the child whose face you open with nothing at all. And it is for the moment when it comes, and it comes for every man who keeps his post long enough, when somebody folds the world's filth into your hand and tells you to look away, and the only thing in the kingdom standing between that filth and the door it wants is you, full to the brim, and still, and not for sale. I did not look away. That is the whole of what I did. It was nothing and it was everything, and I would not trade the doing of it for every note in the roll, or for the star he never got to wear, or for 10 lives lived softer than mine. The wall held. The world for a night was in order, and the old stone of the sallow arch took one more boot mark from one more guardsman who stood where he was put and did not move and meant it, all the way down.